Climate change is one thing, it's become a buzzword. You speak to anybody today, even a ice cream vendor on the street, understands what is climate change. Because it's very important for him that cool chamber, is so very critical for his livelihood. So you can imagine from where it starts, and then it cuts across. And then so we were also thinking what to do. 20 years back, you're all aware that this climate change, some of these two words started picking up. Initially people were not sure. So they said it's happening. And many arguments, I think by now thousands of seminars, workshops, projects across the globe. And people are still arguing there, is it happening, or was it a bandwagon, or is it, all these kinds of things. But then now people are at least are convinced that there has been a frequent occurrence of natural disasters which we had not seen earlier. That is a simple measure of whether there is real climate change or it's all academic. So that was one point. Second point was people asked, after all, human species is so resilient, so adaptive, and why are we so much worried? Millions of years we have survived. Won't we survive this? And recently, last 3 years, another argument, COVID we survived, and what is the climate change? Every time you bring up these kinds of discussions. But then we also measured, I'm sure the colleagues would agree, when we measured the temperature rise, because weather in the common parlance is only temperature. The rest of the things, humidity, wind current, all that rain comes later. First is the temperature. So what did not happen in 150 years? People showed us the proof that much change has happened in 15 years. Now that was one proof that governments were convinced, and everybody agreed that they should start investing on climate resilience, some kind of a adaptation, mitigation, reduction, resilience, whatever you call it. So governments across the world agreed. Now the COP28 is coming very soon in Egypt, and then every time the COP meets, the Conference of Parties, you're aware of it, the United Nations one, people discuss and they are measuring. There have been very clear, significant increments in temperature, of course, very infrequent rainfall patterns. Dr. Dedwal might have told you the total quantity of precipitation has not changed. Because Madam Chair mentioned that when it comes to agriculture, we are very much worried. Even this time, the state of Karnataka, you must be knowing, there is a clear deficit of 40%. I don't know, Dr. Prabhuraj also might agree a few figures here and there. And overall, there are at least 18%, that kind of a rainfall deficit. And then somehow we are saying that we will be able to manage, and then we are quite, we have been used to it, and that kind of a thing. But then rainfall also has not changed, the volume has not changed, but the frequency, what would happen in June has shifted to July, August, and the rainfall that would occur over a period of 1 month would happen in 5 days' time. Now this is what calls for a preparedness and that kind of readiness to accept these changes and change our whatever practices. And then the question is, with so much of discussions, the questions very clearly the governments are posing to the researchers or academicians or people working in climate changes. All right, we have invested. Now, at least 15 years now, this country also has invested very clearly in climate change, whatever. Now, you saw the Ministry of Environment, Forests, 2 words were added to it. It became Ministry of Environment, Forests and Climate Change. Very clear, specific schemes, focused investments, all this happened. But what have you given us back? Except the proceedings and so this is what have been very specific questions, both from the central government and the state governments. So we thought better we have something in place to tell what has happened, instead of only discussing what has happened, what is happening, what would happen. Can we come out with some recipes, some solutions? This was the discussion. Fortunately, the government of India approved a national scheme on climate resilient agriculture. It was called a National Initiative on Climate Resilient Agriculture in the year 2011. And the countrywide participation of several agencies, colleagues from different departments, scientists of course, and then universities, and including international cooperation. So I thought in this presentation today, I thought I would share some of those, and these are largely the work of several teams that that were engaged. Because every time we talk of a satellite, we talk of many missions. We know that sir, you are here, and then the agriculture, the canvas is also similar. It could be thousands of researchers and easily crores of farmers, who that's the canvas, and that's where the difficulty also is in to bring in, to implement the recommendations and suggestions. People say that, for example, stubble burning. Every year you are hearing, come Diwali, huge furor, what happens in Delhi. It becomes a gas chamber virtually. Schools are closed, offices are, all kinds of things. So then when people look at it, are there no solutions? Is something being done? Have we got into that kind of carbon credits really, or it's still a discussion? So these kinds of questions, I thought we'll have a few slides brought before you, mainly for discussion, for thinking, nothing in terms of final recipes. Now I hope all of us agree on this. He lights up off Martira Srinivas, a front light. So all of us agree on this, or any hands would say no to it, because we have been discussing on this, and I think this is well addressed. And when we talk of agriculture, particularly for many years now, particularly after September 28th, you all know that Professor Swaminathan passed away on the 28th of September 2023 at the age of 98. And then we also know that what he did for this country with Dr. Naman Borlaug, a Nobel laureate, almost the only Nobel laureate in agriculture. And then further, Professor Swaminathan in 1965, to be specific, when he got the Mexican wheat, dwarf wheat seeds to this country. So when we hear some of those friends, you would not believe. Of course, the front two rows, all of us know, what difficulties we have gone through when it comes to food. But others, when we have this, KFCs and burgers going around, nobody would even appreciate that there could have been times when we ate only red rice. We were dependent on PL 480. We got everything from, it was ship to mouth existence. Those were the specific words in the 1960s. And then came this wheat, the dwarf wheat. And then within 3 years' time, 65 to 68, the wheat production that was only 3 to 4 million tons went to 18 million tons. Of course, today is a different story. We are at 105 million tons of wheat every year. But then that 15 million tons made a big splash. And India, it's not the food, but it's the confidence. That's what, when Professor Swaminathan spoke of food in this country, he did not speak of food. He said every Indian to live with dignity, because food brings that kind of confidence and dignity. These were his words, and we lost him, but he laid a firm framework and canvas for all of us to work. Colleagues, I'm sure all of us would agree with regard to what's happening in the recent times, the pandemic that we went through, and today 800 crore people on the planet Earth. Last November, it's almost 1 year now, we became 800 crores. Now 10 more crores would have been added. This is to the planet. I'm talking to the entire planet. Then health and food, these two have assumed a huge significance in the whole of the world. Every government, of course there are wars going on, whatever, but still health and food production focus is there. We must also appreciate a lot of transformation that have gone in the area of food production. It's not just agriculture, food production, both terrestrial and aquatic, urbanization, and then migration is another thing that we have been talking of. Migration, why we bring in is the rural youth moving away. It's not just the youth moving away from villages, but the loss of skills. Now everywhere skill missions going around. So that's what is happening in this country. Northeast, for example, we see Northeastern boys and girls all over the cities working in petrol pumps and security agencies and so on. What's happening is when they move away, the whole skill sets are lost in agriculture. To reskill them is so difficult. So this is what is happening repeatedly, and we are aware of these aspects. Today's ಇವತ್ತಿನ ಕಾರ್ಯಾಗಾರದ ಹೆಸರು ಕೂಡ ನಾನು ಭಾಳ ಸಲ ಓದಕ್ಕೆ ಟ್ರೈ ಮಾಡ್ತಾ ಇದ್ದೆ. ಅದು ಕನ್ನಡದಲ್ಲಿ ಭಾಳ ಕ್ಲಿಷ್ಟವಾಗಿ ಬರೆದಿದೆ. Of course, it's mainly with regard to climate resilience and sustainable, whatever goals that we are targeting. So 7 of those goals clearly targeted around, they work around agriculture, food, water, climate, and so on. No, sorry. Then this, we must appreciate, because the agricultural imperative with the kind of population growth that's happening and the loss of land, natural resource degradation, climate change, not the least, it's huge challenge, that we continue with this kind of food production systems and see that, we can produce anything else, but then having basic food requirements domestically, we require that every country is self-sufficient. And that's where we are worried about the climate. The global climate index is, we are at the 7th position, and the index is as high as 16.7. That shows the precariousness of what climate could do. As was mentioned, we are mainly rain-fed agriculture. 60% of agriculture in this country is still rain-fed. ಮಳೆ ಬಂದರೆ ಉಂಟು, ಅಂದರೆ ನಮ್ಮ ಎಷ್ಟೊಂದು ಜನ ಹಳ್ಳಿ ಕಡೆಯಿಂದ ಬಂದಿರ್ಬೋದು. So again, we can understand. So we don't get that kind of a water, soil moisture. That's important. And this is the global picture. Even today, nearly a billion. We are talking of today 8 billion people on planet Earth. A billion at least still facing challenge of hunger. And then it goes on. I don't want to. You can read some of them. The point is, the Asian continent is all the time focused. Sub-Saharan Africa and South Asia. These two are all the time talked about when it comes to hunger and malnutrition. South Asia is mainly India, Nepal, Bhutan, Sri Lanka, Bangladesh, and so on. Now, this is what we would like to call it as footprints. Every time we talk of footprints, it's starting from Norman Borlaug, as I mentioned, Professor Swaminathan, that Korean. Again, if we are talking of dairy and milk with confidence, it is this person. And when it comes to fish, it is one Dr. Chowdhury who bred the fish, when it comes to breeding of fish, inland, freshwater. I understand many of us are from engineering colleges, but here in this auditorium, but then the point is, we have to know something basics about food, and food is everybody's business. And that's where I'm bringing out this. Dr. Chowdhury bred the fish in ponds, and that led to many other things. Colleagues, not to overemphasize, this country is only about 4% of water, 4.5. Similarly, 2.5% of land of the entire planet Earth. But we are sustaining 18% of human population, 143 crores today, and then 15% of the livestock. And 1/3 of the country is cultivable. Rest of it, for many other uses as is required. And even today, 44% are into primary agriculture. So 44% means it's something like 60 crore people in agriculture. And of course, the GDP contribution about 18% and so on. And in Karnataka also, it's very important to note this. We have as many as, how are we, people keep asking, how are we comfortable then? How are we not worried? How is it that we don't have the kind of famines that we had in the Bengal famine, That's because of two things. Dr. Ramakrishna might have spoken to you about biodiversity. Madam also all the time emphasizes on the ecological balance and so on. That is one thing. And then the second thing is this kind of agro-ecosystems. Throughout the country, more than 127 agro-ecosystems. This state also has 10, whether it's Coorg, the hilly, or the coastal areas, or the plains, or the northern Karnataka. Now, if one area fails, other areas produce food. That's how we are able to manage this kind of food balance. Otherwise, many countries are with monotonous crops. Maybe just in many European countries, it's only wheat. In US, it's only soybean, corn, and wheat, and nothing else. That's the kind of agriculture. But in India, it's such varied diversity that has been put to agriculture. 58 commercial crops clearly. So this is what is taking us through this huge country. And similarly, when it comes to Karnataka, it's 5% to the country's food basket, and 50% people in Karnataka are absolutely into agriculture. I won't go into these details, but then just to tell you that food production has been continuously increasing. So what is it broadly? Today we have something like 33 crore tons of food grains. It's in million tons, 332 million tons of food grains. Very important. Always we talk of food production, that's rice, wheat, maize, some pulses. But that's not all. The fruits and vegetables, which please appreciate, the younger generation again would not even know that we never got apples when we were young. It used to be largely bananas and maybe some guava and so on. Now that kind of a huge production and countrywide, pan-India availability of the kind of fruits and vegetables is again a huge revolution. Dairy, we are the largest producer of milk, meat, fish, egg. So I always say this, all put together, it's about 1 billion tons of food. It's not just the food grains. And that's what is carrying us through. Other details I won't read, you can make out from there. Now what is the new agriculture? As we go further, it's becoming very clear that we have to produce more from less for more. And a kind of shift has to be brought in. COVID period, 3 years, really clearly brought out this requirement of more protein. And then now it's stress agriculture. That's where we are talking of value addition, specialty agriculture, a continuum from agriculture to food, to nutrition, to health, to environment and employment. Because the main concern today of the youth is with regard to gainful employment, remunerative occupation. That's where the agriculture has to be made more attractive. And that's where I said, the confidence of this country is, fortunately, the biodiversity, more than 10%, whether it's terrestrial or aquatic, but the natural resource base, kindly see, we don't have more than 0.1 hectare per Indian as per capita land availability. Whereas in US, it could be 10 times more, because that country also, given the land area and population, they are just 1/3 when it comes to population densities. So when people compare countries like US, Brazil, China with India, the comparisons have to be comparable. So that's where we bring in some of these, these aspects. And again, the food diversity in India. Please appreciate this another aspect. The culinary diversity is so wide. There are 17,000 primary recipes. For example, dosa andre doseಯಲ್ಲಿ ಒಂದು 100 ಥರ ದೋಸೆ ಮಾಡ್ತಾರೆ. But dosa is only one recipe. ಅದನ್ನು ತಗೊಂಡ್ರು ಕೂಡ it's something like 17,000 recipes. Why I am bringing up all this is each of these is being impacted by climate nowadays. When people take their food, they compare, with regard to one is the food, the edible portion is one thing, but the taste, organoleptic qualities, the nutrition qualities, each of these are all the time discussed. Now, what is the future? What are we to do as we go further? It's just not the food grains, it's so much of other things. Other aspects of agriculture could be dairying, fisheries, livestock, field crops, and agroforestry, and so on. Now, another aspect is how to make the farmers into agripreneurs. Now, you are aware, people are giving up farming. There's so much of drudgery there, labor costs, there are attendant, many other issues. So now, if people stop producing food, many other social schemes and other things, we'll not discuss that here. But the point is, this is what is the requirement. And in the meantime, we have been talking of how to enhance the farmers' income so that they stay with agriculture. When we compare other incomes of other occasions, service sector, for example, today, that's the maximum, and the industry and agriculture. So how can we make ourselves comparable? That's the question. So how do we add value to agriculture? And for this, many kind of recipes have been brought out, but the challenges are also increasing. For example, the climate change. And the way we produced food, when we became independent, we were only 35 crore people, and the food production was 50 million tons. And that's where we had started importing. Today we are 143 crore people, and our food production is food grain to 300 million tons. But the point is, every time we are asked to have a tag of how much energy and how much water. Water, energy footprints have become very important. Whatever we do, it has become important to account some of these. So in this context, we have to produce food that is competitive globally. If I produce more food, just that's not enough. Because tomorrow, for example, in case of pulses, countries like Tanzania, Myanmar, Canada, They're all waiting to export their pulses to India. Now, if we simply produce pulse, it's not enough. It has to be at competitive rates globally. And that's where we keep, for example, this time the World Food Day last month that we organized, here the basic question was, everything else would be available, but it's the water, the criticality of water as an input. And these pictures are very common, I believe. It's available everywhere. And that's where I just mentioned how extreme weather and agricultural productivity have been going on. Now, on one hand, we have to continuously enhance the productivity. Productivity is kg per square meter or tons per hectare or whatever you call. Now, that is the productivity. We have to keep on increasing, and it is happening. Otherwise, we wouldn't have been able to bring the food production from 50 to 300 million tons. On the other hand, there is so much of drag from other aspects like stresses, abiotic, biotic, natural resource degradation, and now the climate change. So now this is how it happens. Every time we try to bring in new varieties, new components, new practices, there is also a resistance that occurring naturally. Now we all keep hearing about this. This time what happened, people have been explaining the Pacific Ocean, surface water temperature, and how it's affecting the, all the other continents, including the Indian continent and so on. So I'm sure Dr. Redwall might have spoken to you about it. Now we are mainly concerned with the water availability, and when it comes to the country, this country, something like 4,000 billion cubic meter available, was that much of water, fresh water. Now of that fresh water, the demand from different sectors also had to be factored in. The industry sector and agriculture. Earlier, 50 years back, agriculture was the primary user of water. Nobody asked us how much water do you use. But now things are different. There is a competing demand for water. So this is how we have been kind of mapping what could be the projections as we go along in the next 25 years with regard to industry. And so I see the industrial requirements will be huge. They will increase. The energy requirements, again, even in spite of thermal, maybe nuclear as we go along, but still, there is still a hydel power requirement for when it comes to water resource. Now, domestic water use, other human consumption, then comes the irrigation. Now, this is what we have been trying to project, that we would bring in smart measures. So, we would bring in smart agriculture. So, the water would not, continue in the same breath. And if it continues, the people will not also appreciate, and that water would not be available. So we have to factor in this, and that's how the climate resilient practices are being worked out. I would not again go into details. I will show in bigger pictures. Again, state-wise, commodity-wise, we have been working out how much water is used for product producing, for example, a ton of paddy, rice, or a ton of wheat, pulse, and so on. So these are being worked out. This is what I would bring the broader pictures also. Now this is to be absolutely remembered, kept in mind. This country, more than 50% is the water's availability, severity is so high. And it's almost that we are taken for granted, and we go the way as we were, the business as usual, as they say, without making any changes in our practices, our life patterns, and so on. Now that's where we keep again looking at how much water was being used earlier, how much can it be brought down. Again these are some of the things that have been clearly quantified. And the point is, we have to project water maps, water requirements, water budgets. It cannot be in silos, it cannot be in isolation, it has to be with other sectors of economy. That's what is being done. Again, in the same breath, the gas emissions have also come into discussion. And this is where now these have been brought out. For example, pre-industrial, how much was the carbon dioxide, the current one, and what could be as we go along. So it could be methane, nitrous oxide. Now these are being worked out, both South Asia as a whole and Indian subcontinent. So in South Asia, for example, this is what is happening when it comes to rice cultivation in different countries, and the livestock and nitrogen fertilizer and so on. Now nitrogen also, when we apply urea, for example, you all know urea is a very common fertilizer applied. Only 44% of it is utilized by the crops. Rest of it gets into aquifers, and that creates problems. Now this is where the livestock sector again, we also have that kind of a, because it's our tradition. The Asian tradition is that kind of livestock with the human population. Now this is what are the pictures, and this is where we look at agriculture sector, for example. Again, don't worry about too much of statistics, but then this is what is something like 14% of the emissions in India are from agriculture, because usually people say that it's so high, much higher, but then these have been quantified. So in that enteric, that means from the livestock, hasu, emme, puri, itaradella, and the ruminants, adrinda about 55%. Rice, the paddy, because rice is also very important for us. We produce something like 100 plus million tons of rice. So from that about 18%. And what fertilizer we apply? Now this is important, because with great cost we apply fertilizers, and it should not be excess, and that it would create problems. So like this it goes on. Now the straw burning, for example, in northern India, a ton of rice residue burning, this kind of a picture, 60 kg of carbon monoxide, a ton of carbon dioxide, and so on. So 23 million tons of rice, that is straw that is burned, it is something like 9 million tons of equivalent carbon dioxide. That is where is the problem in Delhi and around Haryana, Punjab, and so on. Now these kinds of things, again, now alikallu anta karitivala, the hailstones. When we were young, we have all the picked them up, 2 grams, 5 grams, 10 grams of that kind of thing. Now we have seen the hailstorms. Not hailstorms you would happen normally in northern, in Uttarakhand, but these are the pictures from Maharashtra, right, in southern Maharashtra. These kind of hailstorms, hailstones, maybe even up to 2 kilograms of hailstones, physical damages to vehicles. Now these are things, these are the aspects of climate change that is worrying agriculture. Otherwise people will say that nothing is happening, it's all gradual, why are you so much worried? But then these kinds of happenings which we had never come across, and including physical damages, are what are worrisome. So this is, in this context we keep analyzing, projecting, and so on. Now what would be the projected impact at global scale if we don't do anything? Easily 10% of the crops will be lost, 10% of food production will be lost. So that's where people have been working on the adaptation, mitigation. These are all IPCC. Again, I'm sure Dr. Ramakrishna and others would have dealt with them, International Panel on Climate Change. And then next this is where we brought in a national scheme in India, national project, national program on climate resilient agriculture. That's what I mentioned. It was a large network program, and initially we didn't even have infrastructure for analyzing climate change. That kind of chambers, initially increasing the temperature, altering humidity, then the light variation, so on. So it all calls for a huge amount of infrastructure that we were able to establish in the beginning across the country. And then these are different pictures for different crops and commodities. And this next few slides are with regard to what did we do with this in the last decade or so, what has actually happened, so that brings confidence to this country. We can do things. It's not so desperate a picture, because we come across several reports, global, national, and so on, governmental, NGO, several of them. So they keep, you keep projections on GDPs, on for example, last few days, it's been a discussion on whether we are at $4 trillion or not, whether we are 2.8, and so on. So now we also will need to have ground data. In that context, the drought monitor, again, lot of collaboration with the ISRO with regard to these aspects. In fact, Dr. Kiran Kumar, when he was the chairman, we worked a great deal in some of these aspects. Now, dryland farming, for example, Karnataka is basically 60% is into dryland farming. The kind of crops, pulses, maize, and so on. Now that's where there are different kinds of varieties, water-saving technologies, leveling of the fields. Many of them, as you go to the villages, it's that kind of a terrain, where there could be puddles, there could be elevations, and so on. So even just leveling with a laser, enhance the water use efficiency by more than 30%. And that's where we are talking about water saving technology. It could be laser leveling, it could be pipe networking. Instead of every farming, every holding having a borewell, can we talk of a community borewell program, irrigation program? It did really work near Hyderabad. 100 farmers came together. Otherwise, it's very common in the state that we have borewell across. Now, these were recent missions that we are talking of. As every drop should yield us a little more. In that context, it could be trenching, it could be terracing, these kind of modifications. Now, there are many things. Maybe we won't go into those details, but the point is the water holding structures which could be multi-purpose in different ways. And then this is where I'd like to drive a kind of attention. We are asked to have budgeting. How much water? A ton of paddy, as I mentioned. Can you believe a kilogram of paddy? Paddy to rice is only 2/3. We get only 2/3 rice from a kilogram of paddy. Even for a kilogram of paddy, we require 1,600 liters of water. 1,600 liters of water, 1 kilogram of paddy. You can imagine. That's where we keep talking about whether it's due to transpiration, evaporation, seepage, and the plant consumption all put together. It's 1,600 liter water per kg of paddy. At the cost of repetition, I'm mentioning this. Similarly, these have been worked out for all this. And why these disputes, river disputes, you can very well imagine. That's the kind of water guzzling crops these are. Paddy, sugarcane, banana, and so on. So this is called as water footprint. And then this have been worked out, not going into details, for each of the crops. By now, they have been worked out. And now the question is, are we providing more water than required? That's what is happening. Wherever water is available, you can see the paddy fields flooded. And because of the flooding, the methane emission increases, the unnecessary water, and water, as the water quantity increases, a lot of salinization happens. In this country, the whole of, you start from Haryana up to Maharashtra, where several inland soils have gone alkaline and saline because of excess water. So that's where we are having these kinds of practices and awareness programs brought in. So in this context, several natural resource management includes whether we can manage the gas emissions, and then crop residue burning, what could we be doing about it, precision farming, then water demand, and then some kind of a rationing, and then nutrients also. Sometimes it's mostly low nutrient application, but whatever we apply, it's not in balanced ratio. Now NPK, for example, all of you might be hearing about it, nitrogen, phosphorus, and potassium, 4:1 ratio. But what we do is always apply nitrogen and forget about the other two. And that's what is leading to several other issues and problems. Now this, for example, genomics, all of you must be familiar, a lot of things are happening. We have been sequencing genomes of several plants and animals and so on. Now this is with regard to phenomics. How does the exterior look, and how can we match them? So these were facilities that were not available, and today it's available for the young researchers across the country, at least in 6 locations. Now these are the innovations. Do not happen always only in research institutes. It could happen anywhere across the country. So from northeast to western Ghats, people make their own arrangements. For example, this is for water management. Or next is the wastewater use. The green water, blue water, grey water that you keep hearing about. Can we recycle? That's the next question, and a lot of efforts have already happened in this regard. For example, the rice fish culture, which could be done in deep trenches, and a possibility. And what happened was, this led to integrated nutrient management also. In just paddy, what we would do, have an excess dose of fertilizer or pesticide, but when there is another component of fish, we would be very careful. Now that's what helped in the process. Or the integrated farming. For example, again to come to cost, when you grow rice, it is just about 2 rupees that you gain from a cubic meter of water. But when you integrate, have fish and other components, it could be as much as 14 rupees per cubic meter. This convinced people when it came to remunerative farming. Now, these are again, for example, innovations. Again, we talk of science, technology. Nowadays, it's the innovations, how people customize, when there's a need, how it's not, they kind of highly innovative practices that we keep collecting. These are the kind of mulching and soil conservation that's happening. In the meantime, can we be, in order to address this kind of excess fertilizer use and creating problems and environmental concerns, can we have some other alternative? Nano fertilizers have come in a big way, and for example, 100 kg of urea could be, or it's 100 kg of nitrogen, that's 112 kg of urea, can be brought to just about 8 kilograms of nano urea. That's the economics. And then this, for example, I just mentioned, because we have labor issues when it comes to paddy and wheat, and this is possible when it comes to stubble burning, and the kind of smoke that emanates have been worked out per hectare. I mean, just I'm leaving it that. Those interested can get into some of these. We also encourage youngsters to get into some of these areas. I must also mention several solutions are now coming from engineering colleges. The kind of projects they take, they try to address the local issues, and they come out with clear solutions. And because of that, in this state, at present, there are about 100 agri startups who are doing some of these. Across the country, there are about 700 agri startups. In this state, about 100 startups have taken to not stubble burning, but many other aspects of agriculture they have taken to. And the solutions have come from engineering colleges. Now, this is, for example, the in situ incorporation of residues. So we have got business models for some of these. And agroforestry is another thing, for resilience. Now, this, of course, we had all that kind of problems. Now, afforestation is talked of, and our colleagues, Dr. Sangarurmat is not here, he left. Now, again, the kind of afforestation that's happening with a single species or two species without a scientific, a kind of background there. When you visit forests in the recent past, the kind of, again, they all have become kind of monoplantation. Now, these are the discussions that are happening, and again, agroforestry, several business models have been brought out. Now, integrated watersheds in very important interventions. I must emphasize again, it's engineering and agriculture. It's not just agriculture. We are basically biologists, but the engineering interventions have been very, very important. Now, in resource management, for example, it could be direct seeded rice. It's available. It's happening now. And then nano urea, I just mentioned. Micro irrigation, people know drip is a very common word everywhere. Now, there are several variants of drip irrigation. And then further, for example, neem coated urea, a slow release of nitrogen so that it doesn't get released in one stroke and create problems in the soil water bodies. And then when it comes to, these were with regard to natural resources. When it comes to crops, I must mention a lot of basic research from several universities have greatly helped in terms of sourcing genes, whether it's for salinity tolerance and many other aspects, abiotic and biotic stresses. And I must also mention this, we have deposited our seed in the, in Norway, near Trondheim, there's a global seed grid. So if something happens, not to worry, the Indian seeds are all safe, and they are being continuously deposited. These are global agreements. And that's where we talk of when it comes to field crops. Field crops are rice, wheat, maize, pulses, all that kind. So please be assured that there are a number of varieties available, and varieties also don't stay for a long time. Because of the climate change, earlier a variety would rule, use the word rule, they would rule for 30 years. Today what we are noticing is in 10 years time, they lose their use. They can't be used. Because that kind of again, that's very critical for us. Similarly in horticulture. Now, we have been again assessing what would it mean again when it comes to this country. Wheat, for example, will go down by 10%. 10% is huge. Please imagine 100 million tons. Recently, kindly be aware, 3 months back, India stopped all the rice export. You must have heard about it. Except basmati, all the rice export was stopped. And you must have seen from the news the kind of furor in whether it's for United States or in Middle East, because we are the major rice exporters. The countries like Thailand, Indonesia, Malaysia, they export palm oil, but they do not part with rice. That's so very important. So 10% means it's 10 million tons gone. So these have been worked out what would be the clear impact of climate change. Similarly, other crops that have been looked at. And I won't again go into these details, but these are the kind of detailed pictures that have been brought about, where it is irrigated rice. That means where water availability is all the time there, or it's rain-fed. Only when it rains, you have water availability. So this has been worked out. And a good amount of biotech interventions that have helped us in hastening the breeding and the selection and breeding process is another important intervention. And fortunately, these tools are being deployed very strongly in agriculture. I already mentioned about nano fertilizers. Along with that also the probes that are very helpful for us in disease diagnosis and so on. And right now, very clearly, we are worried about heat stress, wheat heat stress. In the month of February, when the wheat harvest will be at its peak, 1 degree Celsius rise in temperature, what the estimate is 5 million tons of wheat will be gone, just 1 degree. So you can imagine that's why people are so worried for early wheat sowing in the month of October. And that's where we don't have gap between paddy harvest and wheat sowing, and that's where all this the paddy straw burning is happening. So very clearly we have today wheat heat stress tolerant varieties, rice submergence, nitrogen use efficiency, maize. So some of these. So the point is this country can be not complacent, but can be confident that there are material available. We would not go hungry immediately. That's the point, because many countries are struggling today. Now this again a picture of what kind of varieties and what are their traits for which these varieties have been produced, and only issue is they have to be scaled up. The breeders would produce maybe a ton, but then you need 100 tons, 200 tons for seed, and that's the scaling up issue. That's where the enterprises and startups are coming in. Again, the resilient genetic material. I would go fast on some of these slides. Then this is what is remunerative cropping. You travel 20 kilometers from here towards Doddaballapur and whatever. You can see several people taking to it. Very intercropping. And there are very interesting examples of startups, where they have given the flats, the kind of people, software people live there. They have taken on lease 5 meter by 5 meters plots, and the farmers take care of that, and they ask them to grow a specific type of crop, and they grow, and every weekend they go and visit. I mean, these kind of very innovative models have come up even around Bangalore. And this is, for example, very quickly, the different kinds of systems, rice, wheat, pulses, and so on. Then the future crops. Illi ragi yavalu ellaru ragi tinoru. Iga amele nowadays ella ittu. Ella hotoitu ivaga tirga. Last year, this whole year is the International Year of Millets. Elli nodidru millets, the health foods and millets and organic foods in Bangalore. Every street has a organic food outlet. But we definitely know that much organic food cannot be produced, is not produced. They're all simply being labeled and sold. That's what is happening here, because people can afford to pay. Now when it comes to these millets or some of the other crops, these are the future. We call them as, they were called as anatha belegalu anta, orphan crops. But then we are trying to bring them as the kind of future crops. And this is what is happening around urban areas. The nutri-farms, this is what I mentioned. You indent a crop, and the farmer would grow that, and he can harvest, take home, and then you would pay for the plot. This is the urban and peri-urban farming. Similarly, protected cultivation. Several things are happening, but not viable for every crop. They have to be high-value crops. For example, around Sarjapur and other people grew capsicum. Protected polyhouse-nalli, they grew capsicum. So in an acre, they earned more than 18 lakh rupees. But then, so crops have to be that kind. Otherwise, simply growing ragi and rice would not be helpful in protected cultivation. Hydroponics, aeroponics is another thing. Sometimes viable, and many places not viable. But then these are possible interventions where you can use wastewater recycled in different forms. It could be floating horticulture. where we don't use soil-less culture antala matadtariga, and vertical farming is another possibility. And now another issue that has come up is, again, Dr. Ramakrishna and others would be familiar with this, the whole pest behavior, the emerging pests, new pests that are coming in. For example, in this state, 3 years back, the whole maize, when the army fall worm anta bantu, people did not know about it, and that damaged everything. And this time again, for example, in sericulture, silk, for example, they got into these issues of non-spinning. Adu reshme hulugalu goode katta illa. I mean, these are actually local ground level problems, and some people, the scientists know something. Many times they also have to learn. It's not that they know everything. So it's become that kind of challenge. So these are happening due to this kind of severe climate change. We may not appreciate, but if we are in that particular profession, it's such a huge shock to the entire family, and it goes on like that. Then in this context, what's being done is the integrated pest management. In different forms, can we look at them, and many models have worked out very well. And horticulture, again, I must mention, there are, for example, mango. Mango seasons have changed, flowering agate, fruiting agadilla. We see a lot of flowers, but ಆಮೇಲೆ ಯಾವುದು ಬರೋದಿಲ್ಲ. ಅಥವಾ the good yielding tree, next time ಏನಾಗುತ್ತೆ, they would all end up with small fruits. I must mention also here Dr. Onkar from the Indian Institute of Science. He is a specialist in imaging. He has brought out some tools of mapping the mango trees. He is able to tell which tree you can harvest in this week and which you have to wait for. And it's very amazing. It's a lot of ground truthing that was done, and his spatial image matched. So the point is, these are the intervention points even for engineering students, and it's being received very well. We require that kind of new interventions. And so this is where we are talking of climate smart integrated farming systems, depending on water availability, temperature, and so on. Now the problem is, there are models available. There are some standardized technologies. I won't say everything, but the problem is with regard to scaling up. Kindly appreciate, the canvas of agriculture is very huge. Small, it's not just the districts, towns, small taluks, villages. You can imagine. So this intricate intervention required is very difficult, and that's what people keep on asking, why is it not happening? You can imagine the flow down, the absorption of new technologies takes time, and then the wherewithal to adopt them takes time. So this is where things are getting delayed. Otherwise, with regard to the agricultural research, knowledge, the kind of technologies, recipes, they are continuously being addressed and evolved. Now that's where this question was brought out, that it's not possible just by whatever a few governmental departments or agencies. There have to be a lot of village institutions, whether it comes to farmers in the villages, or it's a lot of, for example, the women self-help groups, women who are in the villages all the time, or the coastal villages where the women are there, largely in the village. They don't go fishing, for example. No, they have taken to some of these, receiving information, converting them into local, usable, recipes, advices, and so on. So that's where we bring all these. That's what we call them as climate smart farming. ಯಾಕೆಂದರೆ ರೈತರುಗಳು ಕೂಡ ಕೇಳ್ತಾರೆ, ನೀವೆಲ್ಲ ಸ್ಮಾರ್ಟ್ ಫೋನ್ ಹಿಡ್ಕೊಂಡು ಬರ್ತೀರಿ, ಎಲ್ಲ ಸಿಟಿ ಎಲ್ಲ ಸ್ಮಾರ್ಟ್, ಎವ್ರಿಥಿಂಗ್ ಇಸ್ ಬಿಕಮಿಂಗ್ ಸ್ಮಾರ್ಟ್, ಓನ್ಲಿ ವಿ ಆರ್ ನಾಟ್ ಸ್ಮಾರ್ಟ್ ಅಂತ. So then we tell them, no, we can become smart. How do we become smart? They have to be water smart, energy smart, input smart. That's what is being addressed now. Now when it comes to livestock, maybe a few minutes more, madam. So now it's again a very, this is important, because when it comes to cattle, about 20 crores in this country, hasugulu, MA about 10 crores. Goats about 14 crores. Of course, goats disappear. Every time, all these, I don't know what to say. But then the country's asset with regard to livestock is this. Very few countries, let me tell you, is, for example, Brazil, is comparable. And in fact, Brazilians have taken our breeds. For example, Mura, they have taken our breeds. And when we went there and we saw the way they have improved those breeds is amazing. That one intervention we did not do here. So they have remained that way. For example, This is the kind of availability of products. Now, if you look at the country's breeds, very prestigious breeds, can be proud of them. Only thing is, what's not available is the fodder. So the corresponding fodder, ದೊಡ್ಡ ಇದ್ದಷ್ಟು ದೊಡ್ಡ ಮೇವು ಕೂಡ ಹಾಕಬೇಕು. But what's not available is this kind of one is the food and the health interventions to keep them very healthy and make them yield much higher. But in this context, what's happening, the climate change is playing, these are again some of these breeds. Now, the problem is with regard to, whenever it comes to emissions, there are the international panels who keep charging the Asian countries with regard to emissions from the livestock, enteric emissions. For example, a liter emission, given these aspects, these have been worked out very clearly. I won't again go into detail, these are too much. But then point is, for each animal at different stages, with different feeding strategies, we have worked out what could be the emission per animal. Per liter of milk, how much it could be. This kind of budgeting has been done. For example, this is state-wise. When it comes to some of these states, animal component, for example, 60% come from the cattle and buffalo population that are about 330 crore. So these are required because when we have to defend ourselves, because the issue of subsidy and so on, when we have to defend ourselves in the global fora, these statistics are required because it could be vehicular traffic, it could be industrial emissions, it could be the developed countries who do not pay penalty or who do not invest enough in climate resilience. And fortunately, we must be assured Indian government is very, very well versed and very keen on some of these investments and management. And this, for example, hotspots, which are the hotspots in this country? Again, you can see this. These are the central India, for example, is mainly with regard to the enteric emission. So the mitigation strategies have been worked out, what feed formulations can be adopted, what kind of some kind of moisture maintenance in the sheds and so on. Now again, the impact of diet, I just mentioned. There are clear formulations, additives available along with the fodder or feed ratio that would reduce methane content in the emissions. Now, when it comes to fish, very quickly, very important, 1% to the GDP of this country. This state also, you are aware, 300 kilometers of coastline. Yesterday was the World Fisheries Day. A lot of things were discussed in Bangalore. And then we are second largest producer of fish after China. So these go on, but what's important is the aquaculture, the fish culture is also growing so fast. But what's happening is 2004 was the first major incident, the tsunami, which we had never ever had experienced earlier. It's about 20 years back now. The tsunami that hit the eastern coast and to partly west coast also, this created so much damage. At the same time, the awareness to keep track of these, not only cyclones, and at the same time manage them. For example, sea surface temperature is very clear increase is happening. Very clear means it's not in units of 1 and 2, it's 0.1, 0.05 and so on. But our problem is the fish stocks. For example, these are very classical sardine, a pelagic, the pelagic fish called sardine. The stocks, that were available only in the southern part of the Indian Ocean. Today, they are available in the northern, that means to the coast of Andhra Pradesh, Gujarat, and so on. That is worrisome. Similarly, the sea level rise. When it comes to Bangladesh, this is being discussed every time, a centimeter rise in a year. It's not small. So here also the island systems and coastal systems are threatened. And that's where we are looking at livelihoods, what is lost and how it could be rehabilitated. And for example, mangroves that we have lost considerably, how they could be afforested, or some mitigation measures of how to hold soil conservation in coastal areas with some of these interventions. And the climate resilient food crops also are being discussed, and like these workshops, we continuously hold along the 8,000 kilometers of coastline of this country in small colleges and schools. Workshops are arranged to teach about the climate resilience. Or otherwise the countries like Maldives are so much into threat. Now here we also look at the carbon footprints, and then what is the emission from ponds. For every ton of fish, how much could be the emission? That's being worked out, because otherwise exports are not accepted. Earlier the exports were mainly with regard to residues, antibiotics and so on. Now it's also with regard to green labeling. How much of carbon dioxide, what is the carbon footprint that you are leaving in some of these. So we are trying to project what is the sequestration, how much carbon dioxide is absorbed by the terrestrial system, terrestrial food production systems and the aquatic ones. At the same time, the seas, many places, they are getting acidified, the coral threats, coral reefs getting threatened. These are also another part of the observation with regard to climate change. Now, interesting thing is with regard to inland fisheries. You know, the Ganges, river Ganges flows from Gangotri to the end is in the last portion of West Bengal. And to that extent, we have been looking at the fish availability, major fish, a group called carps, major carps. Now, they were not available beyond Allahabad earlier. Now, even up to Haridwar, we see the same species. That shows the gradual rise in water temperature in the riverine systems. Again a big concern. So, in this regard, I heard some people are from GIS also. You can look at the canvas is so huge for research. Please get into some of these. These are pristine areas. You can contribute a great deal. And this way we are looking at electronic atlases, water bodies for better management. And I already have mentioned this with regard to water budgeting. I won't take more time. But then even for fish, I mean, of course, we say fish does not really consume water in that way, but the evaporation, the fecal matter, and all that, it requires an amount of water. We also are looking at the reproductive capacities with regard to fish. Yet somewhere at many places, there is a change in the breeding season of the fish. What used to breed in July, a little advancement. So the point is we can't change much. But then can we adapt it? Can we adapt our practices? Can we start culture a little early? These are being standardized. Now, I won't take much time here just to say that these are absolutely in place. So finally, what we want to do with all this is a kind of a recipe for the farmers to be confident. People who are not, farmers means not just farming, anybody who is concerned with food production, that it's a good profession, good vocation, and there is so much science that would enable him or her to go further. Now, UN COP6 and 26 we have talked of, and then finally India took call on 5 points. Again, you must be knowing about it with regard to fossil energy. Then we said that 50% of energy requirements from renewable energy, and we said that we'll reduce the carbon emissions by 1 billion ton by 2030. And then we also said that the carbon intensity to be by more than 45%. And we said by 2070, well, it's easy to promise many of these, but then everywhere, please be assured, there are mechanisms being put in. SDG 2030, for example, only 7 years left, and we have been told that we have covered only about 46%. In the last, it started in 2015 after the MDG. So in the last 8 years or so, we have crossed only about 46%. And this is where we think by 2030, this country, the small marginal farmers will be more than 90%. Now this is another very, very important factor. In no other, except China, in no other country, the small and marginal farmers are this high. In the next 10 years, we are going to be 90%. The farmers are going to be small holders, that means less than 2 acres, and they have to produce 75% of the food. And each of them has to be enabled, facilitated with all the tools, and not only with regard to inputs, but with regard to managing the vagaries of weather and climate. So finally, what we think is the agri-diversification would do a great deal of good. A wide variety of healthy diets, climate-smart food systems. It could be biofortification. You must have heard about fortification already. Salt, iodine fortification was a very old thing. But now there are clearly biofortification happening in fruits, for example, and vegetables. then early warning systems, IoT in a big way, high applications that we have been discussing with the interfacing engineers with the ITs with agricultural researchers, high possibility of IT interventions. Then finally innovation systems, it could be risk management, crop insurance that's coming up, and then safe food, healthy and safe food. So many things. But for example, microplastics is today a big concern. It was antibiotic residues, now came the antimicrobial resistance, now the microplastics. So like this, the challenges keep adding up every time. So it's not just the quantity but the quality of food. And climate, I must mention, not to overemphasize, it's absolutely playing a role, impacting us every day, and people are worried about the next 25 years what would happen. But then these scientific tools, I'm sure is bringing so much confidence to everyone. So that's where we are talking of secondary agriculture, and as I said, biofortification, a food health connect, a fusion of technologies. Any number of technologies would be helpful, and these are actually being, for example, drones. Just an example. So we are able to kind of map the crop areas, but then also the disease incidence. That's very important, and that's where the bio incubators and startups coming in a big way. Innovations across, youngsters taking to several kinds of innovations. I'm just going fast in this. It could be any of these in different forms. So that's where we talk of spatial applications and geoinformatics in agriculture. And digital agriculture is another thing that's being talked of, again to bring in more resilience. And each one can contribute to this. For example, in some schools, kitchen garden is, was already there, but in some schools this has been provided to complete the complete crop season, and then students working on farms. So what we think is, with all this, already its projections are for 2047, centenary of the Indian independence. So the hope that's required, the strength that is required will come only through food production. And I would like to acknowledge a large number of my colleagues who have contributed to this. Finally, agriculture we think is everybody's business. It's not a few farmers, it's not farmers and some researchers. So thank you very much for your kind attention.